Hi, everyone. Thank you for agreeing to meet again. It's nice seeing you all again. So, mostly, Zach and I were interested in just getting an update on what's happening with our research now that everything, the whole world has changed, and then talking about what next steps, if any, there need to be. Do we need to uh, create a new SOW and submit that all over again? Is that the direction we're moving in? And I'm talking about both the research that's in progress with TNTP and then also our SOW that seems not to have gotten any traction. So we want an update on that if it has, obviously, for the all teacher survey research. So that's where we were going to start. Did everybody see the agenda, by the way? Or should I share my screen on this?
So it's also linked in the chat. Alex just put it in the chat for everyone to click on the Google Doc. Everyone needs it.
And I just want to say again, thanks to Alex and John Paul and anybody else on the staff for trying to figure out how to make this all work technologically. It's really amazing, I think.
Would it be easier if I just share screen on the agenda as I go through it? Maybe I'll just do that.
Sure. I'm going to make you a presenter then.
Okay. Oh, I need to be a presenter.
Yep. Hold on.
Exactly.
Okay. You should be able to share it now.
Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. So I just talked about the first item, second item. Correct me if I'm wrong, John Paul, I think we are not doing number 3 because we can't. Is that true? Number 3 being generating or fleshing out the all-teacher survey questions. My understanding from your last email was that it would be a conflict of interest to do that. Is that true?
We should not generate. I thought the all teacher survey questions was part of the statement of work that we were designing. Is that separate from what we're talking about here?
I think it would be separate because the idea is that since we have more time, ostensibly, we could use some of that time to think more about what we would actually want to ask. I mean, we created an outline, right? But maybe it makes sense to use, and this is just a proposal, to use some of this time that we've bought to think about those questions. Are they the right questions? And if so, how would we flesh them out so that we, we're clear on the direction we're moving in.
I think it's actually a pretty good idea to potentially use some of this time to think about, even if we determine sort of what the categories were that we're asking in the FL teacher survey. I think that could be a very great use of our time right now. I think we'll need to go back to the all teacher survey statement of work and determine if any alterations need to be made to that, because I believe some of what the all teacher survey or statement of work says is that the vendor will develop them in coordination with us as an entity. So,
right. So we would just be moving that process ahead a little bit ahead of time, is what I'm saying. Yeah, okay, so yeah.
It's fine.
Okay, good. And then we just need to align on next steps, which is what we would.
Can I say something? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So I just want to offer my own interpretation, clarification of that, and make sure we're all on the same page. Because my conversation with John Paul was, insofar as we can move this ahead on our timeline ASAP, we should be doing that. And I know there's issues with whether or not, OCR will take up our business while they're dealing with other stuff. But my view is that we want to move as quickly as possible. did, we had a group on SOW, which had, I think, 2 or 3 little places where we had questions for the vendor conference. So I went through it and just sort of took out the questions and just sort of made them, well, they weren't questions. They weren't questions for a vendor. They were essentially questions within the document. So it would say something like, the time would be somewhere between 20 and 30 minutes, as opposed to saying, how long should it be? Thereby making it possible to just keep moving that forward. John Paul, is that your understanding?
So, yeah, the questions that we had embedded in the statement of work that was for the vendor discussion were things that we had put in there because we weren't sure. Like, is it, like you said, the 30 minutes, is that an appropriate time? Is it not an appropriate time to be able to do a survey of this type? And we wanted the vendors to be part of that conversation. So we can, keep that in there, leave it out, whatever. And I can, if you'll give me a second, I can put that document into a Google Doc so that we can all look at it at the same time.
Okay. I think the main thing, what I think, tell me if anybody thinks otherwise, is insofar as we can, we want to move this forward. Okay.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Right. So I think let's start with the update on where things stand right now, with both research projects, and then I think we have some questions after that that will move the other 3 and 4 along. I think for the questions, I don't have them at my fingertips right now, actually. So maybe what we need to do about that is just decide that we are going to work on them offline, and because actually I was thinking we weren't going to be able to work on them. So yeah, what are your thoughts about that, John Paul? Like, just logistically, can we pull those up now to work on them during this meeting period, or do you think it makes more sense to do it at another time?
Sorry, are you talking about the questions that the survey will hit, or the questions that are embedded in the statement of work?
The former.
I don't recall having a document with those laid out, but if you have one, can send it to me. I can put it in.
I think that. Oh, I thought we did. Maybe that was
SOW, I think.
Oh, so it is the one that's in the SOW.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's like an appendix, I think, to the SOW.
Yeah. All right. Sorry for confusion around that. I guess I had worked on it. I think some other folks had worked on it. And I thought we had decided not to put the whole document into the SOW.
Oh.
And so I think there's a document somewhere that is much more lengthy than what ended up. I think we just pulled from that. So let me look for that. In the meantime, let's get an update from staff on first the standards research with TNTP.
Okay, I can do that while John Paul's looking for the other documents. So as far as TNTP goes, I think I shared this information with most of you via email. And so on around March 18th, so mid-March, John Paul and I connected with Bailey and Karen from TNTP just to provide updates on the second grade ELA observation work, kind of as well as the status of the DCPS research proposal. This was kind of just as the COVID-19 stuff had kind of erupted, if for lack of a better term, in the United States, and just started talking about school closures and whether schools would be open or not. What we had kind of tentatively agreed to doing was really pausing this work stream until we know more about when schools are going to be opening back up for potentially this academic year or not. The updates I had provided in the email were one on the DCPS research proposal. DCPS had indicated that they had a few follow-up questions for TNTP and that they would be reaching out directly to them. I know John Paul followed up with Matt Holtzgraf at DCPS, and he was reaching out to the research team at DCPS to kind of figure out what had happened there as far as communication between DCPS and TNTP. I'm not 100% sure if the loop has been closed and those two entities have connected as of yet on the research proposal. But from my understanding, it seems like DCPS is largely on board with the work, but just outstanding questions. When we spoke with TNTP in mid-March, they had indicated to us that all their locally based staff was grounded until the end of March. And so obviously that takes us until tomorrow. I would imagine that that grounding is probably extended, but we have not confirmed that with Bailey or Karen. And so what this means for TNTP and their local staff is that any work that these staff were doing in or with schools had been paused, and that TNTP staff were instructed, one, not to enter schools, and B, not to really engage with schools and or staff on those projects. So again, I'm not 100% sure if that grounding of staff has continued. I would imagine it has, though. Some other things that we had discussed in our update call was, one, John Paul had raised just the general fiscal limitations that we have, given that this contract was issued in fiscal year 2020. And I think John Paul has been trying to connect with OCP on what a potential extension might look like, and kind of that piece is unclear, and John Paul might have more insight on that. But we did express to TNTP that as the contract currently stands, a final deliverable would need to be in hand for the state board by September 30th, 2020. And I think TNTP was largely amenable to the fact that if we were not able to get a contract extension and we had to postpone and move this work into later this academic year, or even potentially into academic year 2020-21, so early August or September, that they would still work to get the deliverable to us by that September 30th date. And then,
sorry, Alex, can I bump in real quick on that?
Yeah, for sure.
So I did post the statement of work now into a Google Doc in the chat, so everyone can take a look at it. And it does have some of the information that Emily was talking about in the appendix section. So I want to make sure that we're using all of the right documents for version control. But I also wanted to note that I did have another conversation, and Ruth and I spoke about this in a little bit different way, related to with OCP, specifically about this contract and whether or not we could potentially extend it over fiscal years or extend it or however it was going to work. And one, there are conversations going on in DC government, both the county and at the mayor's office and others, related to trying to figure out ways of being able to do that type of thing. Part of the issue has to do with federal law and anti-deficiencies and all of these things that come into things. And so it is very complicated for us to be able to do that, especially under the way that we have contracted this, which is through a purchase order. Purchase orders, by definition, cannot go beyond a fiscal year. Contracts sometimes can be extended, but purchase orders cannot. So if we were to think about having to do this into a different fiscal year, we would need to cancel this contract and do a different one under a different method of doing it, which would extend the process out because we wouldn't be able to do any work during that time period. And I'm still not clear on exactly how that would work, considering the emergency that we're under and how long it's taking everything to get out, because everyone's focus right now is on COVID and just trying to get masks and tablets and all that type of thing. And so there are a lot of complications that are coming into this, and so that's why I want to try to be as clear as I can that I am not confident that if we were to try to do this across a fiscal year, that it would be something that we would be able to do. And the other piece of it is, and this is something that Marcus and Ruth and I have talked about too, is it is quite possible that the revenues for the district are going to be down significantly for this fiscal year and next fiscal year. And I think we as an agency have to prepare and try to figure out what that is going to mean for us. And again, we have no idea, right, what that is potentially going to mean for us. So I do think we should try to keep going as much as we possibly can. But there's also the potential that we may be, all agencies may be asked to take reductions next year, or to think about ways of saving money in this fiscal year so that we can cover some of this emergency. No one knows what that's going to mean yet, and we're not going to know. This is the part that's really annoying to everybody. The chief financial officer has said that he will not release revised budget until the end of April. The mayor's budget is due to the council 3 days later. So I have no idea how you try to put together a $15 billion budget in a day and a half, but that's what the mayor's office is going to have to do. So, I mean, I have no idea how to do any of that. So I'm just trying to make sure that we're all on the same playing field, that I think we need to continue to work on these things, but like, you know, there are some realities in this situation that are weird.
So in other words, we're sort of like a little gnat flying around trying to figure out this tiny little piece of the puzzle.
And Marcus is waving away at that.
Yeah, maybe that's why I thought of it. There's one in here too. It sounds to me, John Paul, is this right, that from both what you and Alex said, it wouldn't make sense to cancel this. We would want to get what we can out of it, and then hopefully we can do another one, you know, build on it, whatever it ends up being next.
I think so.
Next semester.
One of the things that we need to consider is, I mean, I think at this point we're probably within a week or so of canceling school for the rest of the year, right? I think it's pretty clear that we're getting to that point where it's going to have to happen at some point. Like, the decision's going to need to be made, either we stay open or we don't. And I think everyone's pretty much leaning towards we're not. So if that's true, maybe one of the things that we do need to think about is, okay, assuming that is true, how do we focus in the effort in the fall, say, you know, that we're starting back in August? Are we going to be able to measure the same things? Are we not? What does it mean to have this project being done at the start of a school year versus the end of a school year or middle of a school year? What does that mean to our potential results, so that we know that ahead of time, so that when we go in and talk to TNTP again and say, hey, you know, you got a month and a half, here's the new directives, we're set. I think we can totally have that conversation and think about that now, so that we're prepared.
I have one question on this, sort of modest in the scheme of things, but maybe helpful, which is, let's say there's this issue of a purchase order can't be continued into the next year. In other words, we figured out substantively a way to go forward, but there's this legal glitch. Mm-hmm. So what is the possibility that at some point we could, I assume the council is going to at some point have to have some sort of omnibus bill that sort of says, you know, here's 25 things that are being, or 100 things that are being changed given COVID. And so what about the possibility that one of the things that could go in there would be something that just sort of said, either for the state board, or if a lot of groups are in the same situation, that for this year, purchase orders can be extended 6 months?
I don't think it's legally possible because of the nature of what a purchase order is versus what a contract is. I don't think it's possible to do that. And I think that's sort of like general accounting practices, statements of work, like this is a larger type piece than I think that we could potentially do. And the other piece to remember that for things that are under purchase order, the money disappears on September 30. It is gone. So there is no money past that date, and no work can be done past that date. And so this is where we get into the sort of nitty gritties that I'm still working on trying to get with OCP. And I think, frankly, they're trying to still understand how to get to all these types of things, but I think it's one of the things that we can then, certainly by the fall, we will have an understanding of whether or not we can continue for this year, or if we need to push it into the next fiscal year and do something else with our money for this year. And again, those are all conversations that I think we're having at the correct time, but we don't necessarily have any of the answers to get to where we need to be yet.
Is there anything we need to do then, given all of that, to help TNTP get what they need virtually? Are they trying to, work with schools, like to interview teachers virtually, or to? No. Okay.
Short answer is no. And I think, honestly, it would be, I don't think this is the right time to encourage them to do that type of work, because of all of the new variables with distance learning and all of the trying to get kids fed type things. I think
it's too much. Yeah.
Yeah. I think if we were to try to push that right now, we would
not push it. Yeah. So what are they proposing then what would the deliverable be based on? Like, what would they just be using existing?
So as of right now,
data?
Nothing. As of right now,
okay.
The last conversation with TNTP is we're putting a pause on all of this work until we have a better understanding of what we can do and where we're doing with it. And that's the last piece that it is, because they are all grounded and at home with their kids, just as we all sort of are. So it is very much a stay in place. We're not doing anything until we have some stability and understanding, that type of thing. I only have a roommate, Zach, so that's close enough.
Yeah. No, I misunderstood then. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, not at all.
That's very helpful context. I guess my thinking, hope, and it seems like we're aligned, is just kind of wait and see where things land and hope things work for September 30th, which I'm anticipating they should, assuming things get under control with the spread of the virus. I think Jessica raises a good point. Assuming things are under control soon, I can see a world where maybe we move up the start of a new school year before we typically start, which might, again, provide an opportunity for us to get the work done. If I could just ask John, Paul, or Alex, when you all, I don't know how regularly you're checking in with the TNTP team. I've kind of, and I think Emily as well, have deferred to you all to do that. If you all can loop us in as it makes sense, just so we can just kind of stay abreast of like updates without just having to come to these meetings, that would be really helpful.
Yes, yeah, so we don't intend to have any conversations with TNTP until we have a better understanding of what we're going to do. So the only conversation that we've had was that first one that I think we did update you via email of we're on pause until we figure things out.
Yeah. So let's say a scenario is school is paused for the rest of the school year. Would that be something you would reach out and give them that update? Or is it just not, or are you thinking you wouldn't reach out until it's like we have a definite timeline of moving forward?
I think it's best if we don't reach out without having some sort of idea of moving forward. And the reason being is we are paying them. Right? So if we reach out and have a conversation, that's a billable type thing. And I want to try to reserve most of the money, frankly, to the actual project and not having conversations with us.
Got it. Wait, they're billing us to email us?
Well, I mean, that's part of the job is billing, right? So, I don't know, right? And part of the complication with the purchase order versus a contract is it's not hourly; it's done by full project. So it's unclear right now whether or not we can or they can actually bill us for anything because the final thing isn't done, right?
Got it. So just to make sure I'm crystal clear, the last communication to them was, we will let you know when we're able to resume this work, given everything going on. And our understanding here is that the money has to be spent no later than September 30th. There might be a world where we may extend things into next year, but we're unclear how that would look. That's not ideal. And so our best hope right now is to wait for more information and get it done by September 30th.
Exactly right. And the only other thing that I will note, and this is something that I feel fairly strongly about, but I don't know that it's even doable, frankly, is that I've asked them to work with their billing team to figure out sort of what percentage of work they have done so far, so that we can pay them something, because they have done work, right? And I want to make sure that, especially since all of their work has to do with going into schools and schools are shut, that means there's no money coming into TNTP at all. So if we can, I want to try to give some sort of billing for the work that they are doing or have done so far, but I don't really want to extend it too much beyond that. I mean, and I appreciate that, Jessica. I mean, that is the we want to try to pay them for the work that they've already done if we can't go any further. So I'm working on that section too.
On the flip side of that, are we in any jeopardy of the project can't be done at all, but we still have to pay the full amount? Or is that not how it works? Or
it depends on how it would potentially be canceled. So if it's canceled, no. But then I don't know that we would be able to pay any invoices. So I'm trying to figure out a good balance between, we have an agreement to pay them for this service. If the service can't be done because of an action of the state board, then yes, we would be obligated to pay them, even though it's because it's not a fault of theirs, right? In this instance, it's not a fault of either one of ours. Like, it's sort of, natural disastery thing. So I think we would probably not have to pay them, but I would feel much better if we were able to pay them at least something for the time that they've already spent. But again,
I thought we lose that money anyway if we don't spend it.
At the end of the fiscal year, yes.
So we might as well pay them, right? If things continue on this way. I mean, is there, I don't know.
I mean, the one other thing I'd add to this is if goal one is to try to get this done as we wanted it. Goal two is that they get at least some money so that they're not in too much jeopardy over this. And I would add to that is sort of our third thing down is if it becomes clear that we can't do what we wanted to do, that they can't help us do what we wanted to do. I mean, can we or Zach or Emily or whoever have a conversation with them to try to figure out, is there something they could do that would be useful? In other words, there's a commitment of bucks. As Emily says, it's going to go away anyway. We prefer to pay them than not pay them. What can we get for that? If we can't get what we wanted, they know a lot of stuff. I mean, I don't know. Look at our...
But we can't ask them to do anything that's not in the SOW. Isn't that true? Or can we get a waiver on that given the circumstances?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. I think if we were to change something in the statement of work, we would then need to change the statement of work to reflect what we were then going to get. I mean, it's a contract change, so it would be. I don't know if we can substantively change things without some bureaucratic stuff, and I just don't know what that process is because we haven't done that in the past. I would feel much more comfortable with if we got to that point, canceling and issuing a new PO purchase order rather than trying to muddy the waters with this one. And I think that's something that we need to determine internally before we would potentially approach any vendor for it, because the likelihood would be that we would need to bid that out again, right? Because if we have bid out that we're going to get apples, and all of a sudden halfway through we decide we want oranges, we need to make sure that the apple vendor can actually do this.
No, I agree. I guess what I'm saying is we are in this weird world, in this weird moment. We have a contract for apples. There's no apples in the world. We're committed to paying. So can we all agree to buy pears? And that's sort of, I mean, it requires sort of a conversation with TNTP to see what they might be able to do. I have no idea. It just strikes me that they know a lot, they do a lot. So maybe there's something, and then a similar conversation with OCP. That's all.
Right. No, and this is the larger conversation of we cannot talk to vendors about what they potentially could do for us, and then issue a statement of work based on that, because that's a conflict of interest.
And they would have to apply, right? Like they'd have to, they wouldn't automatically. So it's not just a matter of switching.
Then that would
The
be true.
project.
I guess that would be true in the world that existed up until a few weeks ago. What I'm trying to say is,
Could we ask?
the point of OCP, we can either lose, $30,000 on behalf of DC and get nothing, or we can all agree to do something else. That's sort of what I'm trying to get at. And if we can't, if the rules prevent us from doing it, the rules prevent us from doing it. But I'd just like to see us try to figure out a way to.
Or have that money go to something useful. Yeah, we want pears over here. So what happens? I guess that's the question now. Like, if we did want to do what Ruth's saying, is that just a matter of John Paul appealing to whatever it is, OC?
Yeah,
my recommendation would be for us to press pause on that and maybe decide that at a later committee meeting, just so we have more time to get more information to see what's going to happen with the end of this school year, the beginning of next school year. So maybe April, May-ish. Should we have more information, then I think we can make those decisions. Thoughts?
Well, would we have time to do it then? I guess that's would it be possible, John Paul, to do both, actually? To find out from OCP what would be possible if we wanted to do what Zach's saying? You know what I mean? Like if we wanted to wait, because that's pretty last minute, right? Like if we waited until July even. Are you thinking, Zach, that we would find out sooner if schools were going to be open in July?
I'm pretty confident they're going to close schools for the rest of the year. I imagine we're going to get that directive by mid-April.
Yeah.
I would hope by June we should have some information about when school might start, or summer school, or whatever the case may be, which should give us an opportunity to circle back May or June to decide how to move forward, which to me gives ample time before September, but maybe I'm not thinking about it the right way.
Okay. Yeah. Is there any harm in finding out? Should we just not bother anybody right now? Is that what you're thinking, is John Paul?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Thinking is everyone's going to have a similar response. We don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know, and it's not our priority right now, and it's
Right.
understandable.
And I think one of the things to remember too, though, is that just because it is not everyone else's priority, that doesn't mean that we can't start thinking about it, right? Like if we as a group want to start thinking, hey, okay, if X happens, then we're going to do Y, Z, P, D, Q. And if Y happens, then we're going to do X, Y, Z, these types of steps. We can start laying that out now. And so that when it happens, we're ready, right? We know, cool. Okay, so school is closed for the rest of the year. They're going to start again in July. So that means we're using plan C1. We can start thinking about, what does that mean? How does it potentially impact the results that we're looking at? To Ruth's point, how does it impact the work that we're doing entirely? Is it the right time to do that type of thing? Is it the right avenue? What does that all mean? I mean, I think frankly, there's going to be there could be a really pretty darn good project of whenever we start school again. One of the projects could potentially be what was the impact of distance learning?
But
that's a good one.
But you're saying that we can't even switch to that, if I'm understanding.
No, there's a different thing between switching to, and if we as a committee and as a board come together and say, look, this is impacting every single student in our thing. We have some money ready to go, and we can set it ready for a research project so that everyone in the district, like, we can just talk to DCPS and PCSB and all those folks now and say, hey, we're going to put X amount of dollars to study whenever we get back. We're going to be in classrooms doing observations to see what the impact of distance learning was on your kids.
I mean, we have to go out and get a new vendor.
We potentially would be.
I mean, that's just what I'm trying to avoid, just for all counts, but okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think it could be a different thing, right? Like we could decide right now, or tomorrow, or a week from now, this project that we really, really wanted is just not feasible in this fiscal year. So we can cancel it, use that money to a different project, and then move this to the next May, next April, if we want to. Right? Like we can start making some of those conversations about what does this mean for us in terms of a project. And I think Zachary, I think in the chat you said something that was right on target of beginning of the year is not ideal for classroom observations.
Yeah, I think I'm just confused now. So we could talk offline. So are you saying if we were to suspend this, we might this year still be able to repurpose that money for another project?
Yes. Yes.
I didn't realize that. I thought we'd lose it.
I thought you were saying before we would lose it as well.
Just at September 30.
But can I just say, it takes us months to get an SOW through. I mean, we can't even get our current SOW through. So the idea that we're going to have some neat new idea and get it into an SOW and get it contracted and get it done by September 30th, that of every single thing we've talked about seems to me the most unlikely.
No, I still want to prioritize our work, but I think that does so if you all saw in the chat box, Emily and I were saying we'll add this to our April committee meeting where we're going to create a path forward for both of these streams of work. I think that puts an option on the table of suspending one or both of these projects. Not saying that's ideal or that I'm proposing that, but just as an option. If we did want to do something around distance learning. So thanks, John. I didn't realize that was an option.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Are we ready to move on?
John Paul, can you capture that in sort of like option A, B, C, so that when we come in, or Alex, so that when we come to our next meeting, this all doesn't have to be rehashed. It's sort of option A, B, C, pros, cons, who had to be consulted for each.
Sure. Can I get a day or two?
We have till the next meeting.
Great, thanks.
A whole month.
And it doesn't have to be perfect, but
do we have a set date for this meeting next month?
Well, this wasn't on the agenda, but I think maybe we should do the same thing as the research committee and just commit to a monthly meeting.
Great.
What do you think, Zach?
I have a only modest preference that it not actually be consecutive. I think these are just hard to do.
Yeah,
in a row.
Agree. So let's just follow up on that and say, well, I'll set up a doodle.
Okay.
Send it out, but it'll be in a month-ish from now.
My preference, just throwing it out there again, is if we can find a standing time for both. I know that's really rigid for folk, but it would just help.
And we did in the last meeting, Zach, for research, it is now. It's the second Wednesday at 2. That's done. You were off the call.
2 is a tricky time, but perfect. Okay, cool.
Okay. So can we actually maybe move to the visioning work? I'm going to share my screen again because I'm not sure how to manage the questions. And I think my instinct on that is to divide them up and have folks actually work on them for the next meeting. Does that make sense?
It's okay.
Yeah. Okay. So hold on one sec. Okay. So this is now moving on to the other well-rounded education research, the access to well-rounded education, and sort of thinking ahead to when things become normal again. So I just want to pause and let you think about that for a second. Things are all normal again at some point in the future. And imagining sort of what we want that research to look like as it grows and expands. So I'm not talking anymore about phase 1, which is the survey, but we had talked about also having focus groups with principals and possibly teachers and having follow-up interviews with them. And then, so that's one piece. But thinking more broadly, even, maybe I'm a little biased, but I think this is a really important topic, obviously, that every student have access to a well-rounded education. And so I just wanted to open it up to a conversation of what role the state board might take in sort of maybe having almost like a campaign around this, right? So this could be part of our research, or it might be something that is separate from research that we're commissioning. So for instance, we might want to agree to all do certain things in our wards around just finding out what's happening in schools around well-rounded education and what supports schools feel like they need. Or we might decide that we want to do messaging around our just how much we value it, and that we acknowledge that it's not that there's a lot that schools are supposed to be doing. So this is really sort of a broader conversation about that, and I guess I'll just open it up and ask what initial thoughts are about that.
Emily, so this is Jessica. In all of my current client projects in my day job right now, one of the things that we're facing as we have conversations about the work we're engaged in is, but what will the world even look like when we go back to school? And so I like the question you're asking a lot, but I would say that I want to add on to it and say that I hope that we think about this really broadly, about how we think about not just what schools didn't have that they wish they could have going forward in terms of a well-rounded education, but also even like what will the time away from school buildings have taught us about what is and is not necessary within the day of school, what we learned from time where children were away from the buildings in their classrooms that lends us to thinking about a well-rounded education in a different way. My hunch is that a lot of families are going to find that their children spend less time every day engaged in the focused practice of being rostered or registered class setting, and that they did okay. And that other families are going to find that their child really needed quite a bit more structure than they got. And some families are going to say, gosh, kids spend a lot more time playing and they still seem to keep up with their schoolwork. And so I just hope that we can think about it with that broad lens, because that's very much in my mind is one of the schools in my ward that serves predominantly low income middle schoolers is having virtual synchronous class sessions in 45-minute blocks from 8 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And that is a ton of time to ask an 11, 12, or 13-year-old to sit in front of a computer screen. And parents who I think are all about the rigor, who have started to gentrify this school, are really up in arms about how much time their kids are having to spend in front of a screen being deeply engaged. So my hope is that we may start to see some shifting conversations. And that's what sparked that for me. So I love this question, but I just hope we also add on the universe of the possible is hugely new in the world we don't know exists yet.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I hadn't thought of that. And because I was trying to think of the world normal again, Jessica. It won't be. I know, that's true. So,
and it's hard to accept that. Yeah. I'm not really ready to accept that either. There are things I still really want to be doing in June, July, and August and September. And I'm like, I don't know what that's going to look like.
Right. No, I think it's a really excellent point. And it would be good to actually, I think, to plan for those conversations, to set up some, I don't know what the format we would want, or maybe we want more than one, if we want to have in ward town halls or just small, intimate, more like I consider our public meeting panels intimate, but or maybe both, where we're getting input on that question. I think it's a really interesting one. So,
and I think you're right too. I mean, it also, just on the basis of social distancing, even if we're going back to schools and work as a regular practice, like, are we going to still want to keep distant from large groups of people for a while, right? Like, the likelihood is this, once we have, sort of the surge is gone, it may come back at some point. So, like, how quickly can we do this? And, a lot of things.
I think it's challenging families, and this is true for myself too, to really ask that question of ourselves. Like, what do we mean? And I guess I'm talking about, when I say we who have school-age children, I have an idea in my head of what I mean when I'm talking very generally about schools, that it's certain, making time for certain subjects. But then now that I have my child at home every day, and I'm the one who has to, decide, well, me and Winston are deciding, are we going to just follow what our school is sending us? Is that enough? Is it, is that well-rounded? It really is. It's been challenging in both a very literal way and also in the way that you're saying, Jessica. I think it would be a really rich conversation to have with families and educators at this time. And I will also say that I haven't heard from a lot of teachers yet, but the ones that I have heard from, I hadn't really thought about it in the context that you are presenting, but it's similar in that they feel like, it's pointing to a problem, which is that they don't feel like they've gotten a lot of guidance, where the expectations aren't clear for what they should be doing. But again, I think it's raising that question of, like, what is appropriate at this time? Like, what does it mean to provide students with well-rounded education from a distance? So yeah, great question.
Yeah, because I will say the one thing I've been in a couple of the DC mutual aid group conversations, the Ward 6 mutual aid small group, and a couple of conversations about digital equity. And one of the things that comes up is there are sort of, like, if you think about like a hierarchy of needs, there's first, I need a device. And then second, I need reliable internet connection. But even once I have that, that does not make things equitable, because some homes have multiple adult caregivers who can alternate times to sit and help me facilitate the learning. Sometimes I'm the oldest human in the house with other younger kids who are my responsibility, and I may still be in middle school. So I think there's that question too of, like, what do we mean when we say, like, well-rounded, and what are schools adding in terms of value? And how do we think about that when we think about crisis hitting or non-traditional settings? But even beyond the sort of distance learning, like, how do all those inequities play into the questions we ask about well-rounded and how we talk about what is well-rounded?
Did my background just get really noisy?
Yeah, a little. Can I jump in?
Yeah.
So I think what Jessica's raising is, it's hugely important. It is interesting to the point of overwhelming. And I want it to be part of what we're thinking about. I also want us, I think, to, at some level, to me, the issue is, how do you get teachers, school leaders, parents, everybody to understand that the well-rounded, by which I largely am thinking the knowledge building, right? Well-rounded can have multiple meanings. And for the moment, I think of this more right now for this committee as not just the reading and math, the science, the social studies, the arts. And
I don't mean to break up, Ruth, but we are now under a stay-at-home order from the mayor as of just like right now. She just sent it out, so just think about that as we're continuing.
Thank you.
What does that mean? I can't go to the drugstore? What does that mean? Anyway, we don't have to talk about that. But so anyway, it's sort of, at some level, the practicalities change, but this idea of how do you get people to understand that this background knowledge, these other subjects are super important. That isn't different. So that's what I want to say. Yeah, how you,
Right.
maybe that you have to talk about it differently. It may be that you can't really talk about it without being specific. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah. I mean, I see them as it may be a yes and situation with, having conversations about, I think what Jessica's bringing up too is something I've been thinking about a lot these days, which is, what we're seeing, we're just sort of seeing the curtain pulled back on all the inequities that we know are there anyway. And it's just really stark right now. Like we can see it in relief, right? And they don't go away when we all go back to school. Kids are going home to really different, and we know this. I'm not stating anything you don't know. So it's in our faces right now. And I think maybe it's a good opportunity to then talk about, I think it underscores even more the need for making up for those inequities in our schools, right? So I think it's a good starting point actually for having the broader conversation about are all schools offering, a really rich, curriculum. So I think, one thing I didn't read the question as I articulated here, but another way to think about this is how do we, it's an opportunity to partner with other agencies, including, DCPS and charter LEAs in finding out how they're defining it and what we can do to help sort of promote what they want. So I think maybe this is a conversation that, we can think about who would talk to different representatives from those agencies or from those LEAs. And then also I was thinking this might be a conversation we would want to have Mialu. I know we say your name wrong, or I haven't said it enough. Mialu?
Malaya?
Lio?
Yes. Malayu in on. So yeah, thoughts about any of that?
I don't know.
Sorry, Emily. I've been multitasking. Can you repeat the question or the frame? I'm sorry.
That's okay. So I'll just read it. Visioning ways that the state board might be ambassadors for well-rounded education based on our own and extant research. So, for example, how we as a body and or individual members might message around the importance of standard aligned you put that in there, standards aligned instruction, broad curriculum to schools, families, LEAs, and leaders. And then how we might partner with DCPS and other LEAs to advance their priorities regarding well-rounded education. So maybe we could just, brainstorm it, unless this is not, does this sound like a good idea? Is this too sort of left field right now? Should we really just be thinking about this first question of, what would our time frame be for phase 2? Maybe we should back up and start with that. I'm sorry, I'm kind of.
Or I don't know. I think this was a useful conversation to start, except I think, speaking for myself, it's really hard to know where to go with it. And maybe the thing is to sit with it, and at our next meeting, we'll know more and we can pick it back up. Because I don't know. I have nothing to offer.
Too quick. Well,
Thanks, Ruth.
that's the first, Ruth. That is a first. You have stumped Ruth, Emily. That's a good one. Two quick thoughts. A general desire that I have is that the board can do more work in wards and then bring that information back that we can then all roll up together. And I think this could fit with what you're talking about here. Like, could we do some individual research, maybe scrolling websites and trying to figure out what is available. I know the committee tried to do some of that work earlier as it relates to calendars, but I think that could be something. Or the committee could just say, all right, we have a lot of downtime while schools are closed relatively. Could we choose a subset of schools or a ward to kind of say, all right, the homework is for members of the committee to figure out as much as we can learn about these schools, talk about it, and then maybe bring it back to the board at a working session just to keep the conversation going, so that we can highlight the variety of ways some students are getting some course offerings versus others. Just throwing that out there as an opportunity either for individual board members to do homework or for our committee as a whole to kind of do it, to bring it back to the working group.
Yeah.
And
That's
what they're doing on what, Zach? On
Yeah.
that's what we don't know.
Wait, say that again?
No, to find that we're going to do our local research and find out what people are doing on what on.
Yeah, I think we could
Tell
tailor it.
the distance learning generally, the COVID stuff generally, or very specifically how they're trying to address science, social studies, et cetera.
No, I was thinking more like in the traditional ways. I think I'm offering schools and folk grace during this distance learning period while people are trying to figure it out. But if we figured out a topic that we were interested in, whether it's band or some type of arts course, could we then choose a ward or a subset of schools and say, let's figure out what is offered, what we can go out and find and come back and discuss it and kind of roll it up just to make it a part of the conversation that the board is having. I think that could just be a interesting opportunity for us to do some of this work. And what I was saying is, or you could task board members to say, all right, Ruth, you go to Ward 3 and your schools, Jessica, go to Ward 6 and figure out all you can find out about which schools are offering students band and what that looks like. And maybe we can make it a point of comparison.
So I'll throw this out as a sort of supplement to the way Zachary's describing this idea. I'm curious what schools are giving a full curriculum during their distance learning versus a more narrowed curriculum, and whether that varies by grade band, by school itself, by ward, how that varies. So I know that Maury Elementary is keeping up with their arts work through their Maury Studio blog. But I don't know whether all of the elementary schools in Ward 6 have arts happening as a matter of like the DCPS mandated or suggested guidance, or if that's just something that like Studio at Maury is a really big part of that school's community and ethos, and so it's still happening. So like things like that to me would be worthwhile questions for us to tackle that combine the two, that say like, how is this happening right now for distance learning and how does it feed into this question of a well-rounded education?
Yeah. So would we have, first of all, like, would we have access to schools' online curriculum? Ostensibly, right? For DCPS anyway.
Most of the
No, I don't know. No, I don't think so.
No?
Well, most of the schools have some sort of link in their family newsletter or on their website now with their distance learning plans.
If you're a parent.
Well, no. I mean, Elliot Hines is publicly available on Twitter. Washington Latin just sent theirs out via an email to Friends of Washington Latin with a hot link. I mean, everything's online now. So I'm sure some of the very specific assignments are safely tucked away in DCPS's like clever login for the elementary schools. But a lot of the schedules are widely open and or being sent out in family newsletters.
Yeah. I mean, what would we do with that information though? I mean, I'm just thinking out loud. So it would be interesting, but ostensibly this is temporary. So Jessica, do you feel like it's saying something enough about the school that we'd be able to sort of understand something about the school more generally when they're not in this emergency situation? Or is there something inherently interesting about the distance learning piece? And that those are genuine questions, not.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, what I've seen so far, it leads me to call the question that says, why did your school make the decision to include these subjects and not others? Not as a call out, like, look at that naughty school that didn't do that, but legitimately, because it could be, to Zachary's point about giving grace, like, it could be a very kind answer, which is, we're deeply concerned about learning loss on math and reading skills, because those are skills that children are most often acquiring only at school. Whereas we expect that the arts is something that children will be able to resume when they come back. I don't know. I mean, that's one hypothetical, while a school might say, this is something we have the deep expertise to do, whereas the others, like, we've given families resources about museums to tour virtually, or PBS Kids things to do, or Nat Geo Kid things to do that would tie into those things. Whereas reading and math, we had to fundamentally deliver as the expert educators.
So here's my concern with that, and I don't want to be a naysayer. I worry that if we focus on these two things together, it's like then we're over. I mean, kids aren't going to school. Kids don't have half of the city doesn't have a laptop. Half the city probably has nothing going on. And to sort of focus in on this narrow thing strikes me as potentially weird. And it sort of both puts us a little bit at a distance from, I mean, if we want to talk about the inequities that are becoming clear now, focus on that. This just strikes me as sort of narrow given the huge thing we're facing. I don't know if other people feel that.
Right. Well, I was thinking of this particular piece as later. Yeah, that it wouldn't be now. Like, we wouldn't want to ask about this now. But I am intrigued by this idea. I mean, I was thinking, as Jessica was talking, that, like, if Maury is doing that, it does indicate that they are probably continuing something that exists that is really meaningful, right? And so it is an indicator of something. It's going back to Zach's idea of just sort of mining what we can find, and Jessica was actually saying this too, like, you can find information without having to ask questions on websites and on, I don't know who's going to do that right now. So that's also, but I mean, I think it's worth brainstorming this.
Also, keeping in mind that there might be a good chance that we have another school shut down because of COVID-19 or some other pandemic. And so we have an opportunity now to see what is working, who has access, who doesn't, why, get underneath those things, to work with schools in preparation if we have to do this another season or next year or something like that. Just throwing that out there. To the question of, like, what might that tell us, or what opportunities that might present.
And I think you raise a good point, Ruth, about the optics of it, but that's something, if we thought it was a good idea, we would just have to manage that. So we can put it on the list as, and it's an idea. Can I actually, so are there other thoughts about that, or about, like, I mean, I like the idea of partnering, or at least finding, some aspect of this work in which it makes sense to think of ourselves as partners with, LEAs, and because, they do want ostensibly to provide a well-rounded education. I don't think there's anybody who would say that they don't.
So one of the things that we potentially could start with, at least, is I know PCSB has now reviewed every single charter LEA's sort of response plan on how they are going to be delivering this distance learning. And DCPS has a plan in place as well. So there could be some work there on just looking at those and see what is in them and what is not, and what do we see as best practice, what do we not. PCSB has evaluated them based on some sort of, who knows, random criteria that they've developed on their own. But as of today. And so part of the reason that I had to jump off the research call earlier is there's a every other day call with the agencies, and one of the things that they talked about with the DME and the agencies today was Scott Pearson brought this up that they have a file of all of the plans, and that they've been evaluating them based on some criteria, and they've sent some back to LEAs saying that they didn't think it was robust enough, they didn't think it was that they were missing parts of it and that type of thing. So I think there could I'm happy to ask Scott for a copy of it so that we can start looking at what those plans are and how does that match up, if that's something that's interesting to folks in terms of these projects.
How it matches up with our understanding of well-rounded education.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it, yeah. Like, how does it match up with well-rounded education? But also, like, how do we then, to Zachary's point about the next pandemic or the next shutdown of some sort of the other, how do we ensure that this is part of the discussion on how to provide this type of well-rounded education in all situations, even in emergencies, right? Because this is important regardless of what happens. So, I mean, maybe this is sort of the beginning of an after action report to say, okay, cool. So we had an emergency, and this is what we learned from it in terms of well-rounded education.
Actually, that's a good idea. I think, thinking out loud, but maybe it is a way of really highlighting that it's as important as everything else. I mean, what I was saying before is that, or I think what Ruth was getting at is this seems very peripheral given the situation. And in some ways it is, for families who are trying to figure out where they're getting their next meal. But in terms of curriculum and making sure that students are, to the extent possible, receiving a well-rounded education, maybe this is the time to make that point. We can start with sort of an analysis of what did happen to curriculum during this time and how we could do it better. Heaven forbid we have to do this again. I don't know. It's a thought, because it's a way, even if we don't ever have to do this again, it's putting something out there, right? It's messaging, and also it's a way of clarifying something.
Well, and I think it gets to, and I think this was Jessica's point earlier, but forgive me if I'm putting words in your mouth. But I think this also gets to the point of if we have determined that this type of thing is important, right? That this is something that we want to make sure is part of our curriculum or our education delivery in an emergency, or how do we then make sure that it's part of all education? Like, how do we start looking at these in a different way? And I think this is the point that that folks were making earlier about, is just in terms of service delivery of education services. I don't think anyone thinks that the distance learning packets and the distance learning is the same education as they are getting in a classroom, right? Like, it's just not. And it sometimes it can be really great for some students. Maybe like some students may thrive on this type of environment, but for the majority, it is a different in education delivery system. So what does that mean for our system, right? What do we need to start looking at in terms of, we've had this major disruption, so maybe this is a great opportunity for us to examine all of the parts of what makes up a well-rounded education and trying to think about that in a larger scheme. And I think having this sort of evaluation on the distance learning plans and saying, okay, in an emergency situation, you thought that this was the best way to get education. This was distilling it to the bare bones of what you could deliver in a distance learning environment. What does that mean? What does that say about the way that we're looking at education? I think that's really interesting. And I think that's something that we can certainly take to larger conversations.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know what it looks like exactly, but I think it's something for us to chew on for next meeting. I like it. Is somebody taking notes, by the way?
Yes.
Yay. Thank you.
Yeah, the staff is, and we're also so part of the open meetings requirements is for us to record all these meetings. So we are recording all of the committee meetings so they will be available both for our future use and also for the public to review later.
Great. Okay, so I think actually that is a lot. I think we have a lot to chew on. And I think for both the standards and this question, this big, broad, messy question I put out there, is there anything else? And if not, I would like to just take the last 10 minutes or maybe less to address the first question here of like, I don't know if we can answer this, but what the time frame would be for phase 2 of the access to well-rounded education if we wanted to start phase 2, which would be the focus groups and the interviews, say sometime next fall. Like what steps would we have to take now, if any? Or are we just really should we not do anything right now?
It is almost impossible for us to do a statement of work for work to start in October 2020. And the reason being is our fiscal year starts on October 1st, and we are not allowed to issue anything until after October 1st.
Okay.
So, and as Ruth mentioned earlier, it can take some time. So the hope is that whatever we do for the fall, if we have their statement of work ready to go in terms of, it is ready for the vendors to start bidding, right? And we can issue it on October 1st. And that's 3 to 5 days for the vendors to look at it, us getting it back. We probably can have a PO or something in place by 1st of November-ish. But that is if every single piece works perfectly and all of our OCP friends are also focused on doing this, which at the same time as us doing it, every other agency is also trying to issue contracts on October 1st. So we have experienced significant challenges because a lot of those contracts are $millions projects, and ours is $20,000.
So, given all of that, what is realistic? Like, what should we be thinking about in terms of that next phase?
I don't mean to say that we shouldn't try to get there, but I think if we can have by for the phase 2, if we can have a statement of work drafted and ready by September, we're going to be in a much better place. So I think we should continue the work to develop the statement of work between now and then, with the understanding that the work we may shoot for trying to start it in November, but it may be pushed a little bit. And this is one of the problems that we got in with some of the other work, right? Is if we don't get a statement of work in hand until middle of November, it means that the focus groups would then be in December and midterms and Thanksgiving and Christmas. And is that the right time? And so this is all the stuff, right? Like these are the realities of what our situation is that's different than every other state who has a different fiscal year.
Got it. Okay. We can start drafting. That's, anytime. And then just have it ready like in the fall, but we can keep working on it. And also, as everybody has mentioned, things are going to shift and we don't really know what's reasonable at this point. So, but that's helpful. Thank you.
But yeah, I mean, and the other part too is like, even if it isn't necessarily helpful immediately, it will be down the road, right? Like, I don't think any of this work is sort of wasting our time or anything like that, because even if it's something that we can't necessarily do immediately, someone else might be able to, or DCPS may say, hey, that's a really great idea. I think we're going to do this, or the DME might, or the RPP might. Like, who knows? But there are lots of things that, at the end of the day, we want equitable education for kids, and we want to, put our label on a number of things. But if it means, if we have to take our label off of it in order for something to move forward, I don't think anyone here is going to say no to it, right? Like, we all want the same thing, which is the best thing for kids. So I think helping us as helping you as elected officials think through all of these different avenues and structural barriers that we're identifying as we go through these things, I think that's also important for us to be cognizant of as we're moving forward with all of these projects. So I think this is all really good stuff.
Yeah, agree. Okay, I think I'm done here. Anybody else have anything else they want to say or share? I'm really glad to see you all and that you're healthy.
Likewise. Emily, just to make sure we're aligned on next steps. So you're going to send out a doodle poll to schedule the standing meetings, right?
Right.
Cool.
Right. And I think, oh, and also I'm going to look at the questions for the all teacher survey and sort of think about how we can work on them together for our next meeting.
And we'll spend time in our next meeting thinking through some of those potential pathways.
Right. Right. And so I just actually want to clarify because I had said in the chat to Zach that we would work on that, but then Ruth kind of assigned it to John Paul. So
Oh, I'm sorry, what?
no, it's
I
okay.
think that should be
Just
something
kidding.
the committee discusses.
But yeah, of course, yeah, but somebody has to draft something, right?
I
That
mean,
we can talk about.
Emily,
Yeah.
Zachary, if you want to sit down with another call with me and we can just go over it together at some point, that's fine.
Cool.
Yeah. And then we share it and everybody talks about it. That makes sense to me. Is that good with everyone? Okay. All right.
I just got an email from Farabee, so I was trying to see if we knew anything more, but
No.
Just resources.
not yet.
Okay.
I did send out the
All
statement
right.
order.
If there's nothing else, then stay safe, everybody. Stay healthy. I look forward to talking to you again, seeing you on Wednesday. That's exciting.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Meeting.